The HFY Empire was old. It stretched across 11 galaxies and controlled more stars than any human could count. The rulers of this empire were not born like normal children. They were made. Scientists grew them in special tanks and trained them from the very first moment of their existence. They learned to command armies, to think without feeling, and to rule without mercy. Prince Valith Keth was the third in line to become emperor. He had silver-white skin that seemed to glow in dim light. His eyes were the color of deep purple flowers, and when he was injured, his blood shone like liquid starlight. In his 200 years of life, he had never laughed. He had never cried. He had never felt his heart beat faster from joy or fear. His people had removed these things from their bodies long ago. They called emotions a disease, a weakness, something that primitive species suffered from before they evolved properly. On December 24th, Valith was flying a small scout ship near a blue planet called Earth. His mission was simple: study the planet. Check if it had resources worth taking. Report back to the Empire. The humans living there were of no concern. They were primitive creatures who had not even left their own solar system yet. They were like insects to the HFY. But space is dangerous, even for an empire that rules 11 galaxies. A small piece of asteroid, no bigger than a human fist, struck Valith's ship at incredible speed. The impact tore through his shields and ripped open the side of his vessel. Alarms screamed. Lights flashed red. The ship began falling toward Earth, spinning out of control. Valith tried everything. He was trained for emergencies. He was trained to survive anything. But the damage was too great. His ship crashed into a frozen field in a place called Minnesota, in the northern part of a country called the United States. The impact threw him forward. Metal bent and glass shattered. Then, everything went dark. The Larson family had lived on their farm for 4 generations. Eric Larson was 68 years old, with white hair and hands rough from decades of work. His wife Marta was 65, a small woman with kind eyes and silver hair she kept in a braid. Their daughter Ingrid had come home for Christmas with her 5-year-old daughter, Lily. The farmhouse was warm and bright with colored lights. A tree stood in the corner, covered in old decorations that had been in the family for years. Thought it was almost midnight when Eric saw the light. He was sitting by the window, unable to sleep, when something bright streaked across the sky and disappeared behind the trees. A moment later, the ground shook. The windows rattled. Marta sat up in bed and called out his name. Probably a meteor, Eric said, but he was already putting on his boots. I'll go check. He took a flashlight and walked out into the frozen night. The snow crunched under his feet. His breath made clouds in the cold air. He walked past the barn, past the old tractor, and into the cornfield that had been empty since harvest. That was where he found the ship Dodd. It was not large, maybe the size of a truck, but it was made of metal that seemed to shift colors when he looked at it. Strange symbols were burned into its surface. Smoke rose from cracks in its body. And there, lying in the snow beside a torn opening, was a figure. Eric approached slowly. His heart was beating fast. He had seen enough science fiction movies to know what this might be. But when he got close enough to see the figure clearly, he stopped breathing. It looked almost human. 2 arms, 2 legs. A face with features that were familiar, but not quite right. The skin was silver white, smooth like polished stone. Purple blood was spreading in the snow beneath the body. The creature was breathing, but barely. Eric stood there for a long moment. Every sensible thought in his head told him to go back to the house and call someone. The police, the military, anyone. This was not something a retired farmer should handle alone. But then he remembered something. His grandfather had come to America from Norway with nothing. A stranger in a strange land. People had helped him when they did not have to. They had given him food and shelter and kindness. His grandfather had always said that you judge a person by how they treat someone who cannot help them back. This creature, whatever it was, could not help anyone right now. It was dying in the snow on Christmas Eve. Eric made his decision. He bent down and lifted the creature. It was lighter than it looked and cold to the touch. He carried it across the field, past the barn, and into the house. Marta screamed when she saw what he was carrying. Ingrid grabbed Lily and pulled her behind the couch. "What is that thing?" Marta demanded. "I don't know," Eric said honestly. "But it's hurt, and it's Christmas." That was all he needed to say. Marta was scared, but she was also the woman who had nursed sick animals back to health, who had taken in stray dogs and hungry travelers. She looked at the silver figure bleeding starlight onto her floor, and her fear became something else. Purpose. They laid the creature on the couch. Marta brought towels and warm water. Ingrid found the first aid kit, though none of them knew if human medicine would help. They did what they could. They cleaned the wounds. They kept the creature warm. They waited. The creature did not wake until morning. Christmas. Morning came with pale winter sunlight and the smell of cinnamon from the kitchen. Marta was making her special breakfast rolls. Lily was sitting on the floor near the couch, watching the silver man with wide, curious eyes. She was not afraid. Children often see wonder where adults see danger. Valeth opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was colored lights. Red and green and gold, hanging from the walls and wrapped around a dead tree that had been brought inside for some reason. The second thing he saw was a small human child staring at him with an expression he could not identify. His training took over immediately. Threat assessment. Location unknown. Injury severe. Witnesses present. Protocol demanded elimination of witnesses to prevent contamination of primitive species with knowledge of the Empire. But the child was doing something strange. Water was coming from her eyes, but she was also smiling. Her small face showed two emotions at once, which should not be possible. Valet's voice was rough when he spoke. The human language felt strange on his tongue, though he had learned it during his mission preparation. "Why?" he asked us slowly. "Is the small human crying while smiling?" Lily wiped her face and laughed. "I'm not crying because I'm sad, silly. I'm crying because I'm happy. You woke up. I was scared you wouldn't wake up. But you did. On Christmas. Happy." Valeth searched his memory for the word. His people had removed it from their language 5,000 years ago. It described a positive emotional state that served no logical purpose. He looked at the child. He looked at the lights. He looked at the old woman bringing him a warm drink he did not need. Something was very wrong. And for the first time in 200 years, Prince Valeth Keth did not know what to do. Valeth's body was broken in 17 different places. His internal repair systems, tiny machines that lived in his blood, were working hard to fix the damage. But they needed time. According to his calculations, full recovery would take 168 hours. 7 Earth days. 1 week. His communication device was destroyed in the crash. His ship was beyond repair. For the first time in his existence, Prince Valeth Keth was completely alone. No empire, no servants, no soldiers. He was dependent on these primitive humans for survival. This should have made him angry, or frustrated, or afraid. But Valeth could not feel these things. His people had removed the ability long ago. Instead, he simply accepted the situation and began observing. The Larsons did not call their authorities. This confused Valeth. If a strange creature crashed near his home, he would immediately report it to the proper officials. That was the logical thing to do. But Marta Larson simply shook her head when Ingrid suggested calling someone. "It's Christmas," she said, as if this explained everything. "We don't turn away strangers at Christmas." Besides, look at him. Does he seem dangerous to you? Valeth was listening from the couch. He could have told them that yes, he was extremely dangerous. He even trained to kill since before he could walk. He knew 300 ways to end a human life using only his hands. But he said nothing. He was curious about what these people would do next. What they did was celebrate something called Christmas. The first strange thing Valeth noticed was the gift-giving. Humans wrapped objects in colorful paper and gave them to each other. When the paper was removed, the person who received the gift would smile and express gratitude. But Valeth could not understand the logic. Eric gave Marta a new scarf. Marta gave Eric a book about fishing. Ingrid gave her mother a picture frame with a family photograph. None of these exchanges provided strategic advantage. None of them increased power or resources. They were completely inefficient. Why do you give things to each other? Valeth asked. Lily, who had decided the Silver Man was her new best friend, climbed onto the couch next to him. Because it makes people happy, she said. When you give someone a present, it means you were thinking about them. It means you love them. Love, another word his people had erased. Valeth was about to explain that gift-giving was a primitive ritual with no practical value when Lily pushed something into his hands, thought it was a piece of paper. On it, she had drawn two figures using colored sticks of wax. One was silver with purple eyes. The other was small with yellow hair. They were holding hands. It's you and me, Lily explained proudly. I made it for you. So you have a present too. Valeth looked at the drawing. It was poorly made. The proportions were wrong. The colors were uneven. By any objective measure, it was worthless. He could not make himself throw it away. The second strange thing was the music. In the evening, Marta sat at a large wooden instrument called a piano. She began pressing the keys, and sounds came out. The sounds were organized into patterns that repeated and changed. The humans called this a song. Vila's people had music, but they only used it for specific purposes. Battle rhythms to coordinate troops. Ceremonial tones for official events. They never made music simply to make music. Marta played something called Silent Night. The notes were slow and soft. Eric closed his eyes. Ingrid put her arm around her mother. Lily leaned against Vila's side, which he allowed only because pushing her away would require more energy than tolerating her presence. And then something happened that Valeth could not explain. His chest hurt. Not from his injuries. Those were healing properly. This was different. It was like something heavy was pressing against his heart. The music seemed to move through him in ways that made no sense. His eyes felt strange, almost wet. He ran a diagnostic on his systems. Everything was functioning normally. But the feeling did not go away until the song ended. The third strange thing was the food. Valeth's people ate nutrient paste. It provided exactly what the body needed in exactly the right amounts. Efficient, logical, perfect. The Larsons spent hours preparing food. They used heat and spices and ingredients that came from all over the planet. The result was not efficient at all. It was messy and complicated and took far more time than nutrient paste. Marta gave Valeth something called lefse. It was thin and soft and rolled with butter and sugar. He did not need to eat. His repair systems could sustain him. But the humans were watching, and refusing would create social complications. He took a bite. The taste exploded in his mouth. Sweet and rich and warm. His eyes closed without his permission. For just a moment, his mind went completely blank. There was only the taste, and something that felt dangerously close to pleasure. When he opened his eyes, Marta was smiling at him. Good, isn't it? Valeth did not answer. He was too busy trying to understand what had just happened to his brain. The fourth strange thing was the stories. On the third night, Eric sat with Valith while the others slept. The old man had a glass of something brown that smelled strong. He offered some to Valith, who refused. "You know," Eric said quietly, "we lost someone. 2 years ago. My son Jake. Ingrid's husband. Lily's father." Valith knew he should not engage. Personal stories serve no strategic purpose. But he found himself listening anyway. "Cancer," Eric continued. "Took him in 6 months. He was 34 years old. Good man. Best father I ever saw." The old man's voice became thick. Water appeared in his eyes, but it did not fall. "Christmas is hard now. Everything reminds us of him. His favorite ornaments on the tree. His chair at the table. His daughter who looks more like him every day." "If the memory causes pain," Valith said, "why do you continue the tradition? Logic suggests you should eliminate reminders of loss." Eric laughed, but it was not a happy sound. "That's not how love works, son. The pain reminds us he was real, that he mattered. If we stopped hurting, it would mean we stopped caring. And we will never stop caring." He took a drink. "Besides, Jake would want us to celebrate. He loved Christmas more than anyone. So we keep going." For him, Valith did not understand. Grief should be weakness. It should make the old man slower, weaker, easier to defeat. Instead, Eric seemed stronger because of his pain. His love for his dead son gave him purpose. It did not make sense. None of it made sense. On the 7th day, Valith woke to find his body fully healed. His repair systems had done their work. He was strong again. He could leave. He could find a way to contact the Empire and request retrieval. Then his emergency beacon activated. It was a small device implanted in his spine, designed to broadcast his location if he was ever lost or captured. The crash must have damaged it, but his repair systems had fixed it along with everything else. The signal went out. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, the Empire received it. Valith checked the response. A retrieval fleet was being sent. 7 warships under the command of Admiral Dexvorak. They would arrive in 72 hours. And then he read the rest of the message. Subject location contaminated by primitive contact. Planet designated for sterilization. All biological life to be eliminated upon retrieval of subject. Sterilization. They were going to destroy Earth. Every human. Every animal. Every plant. Everything. Because Valith had been contaminated by contact with primitive beings. He looked at the drawing Lily had made for him. It was still in his hand. He had been carrying it for 7 days without realizing it. Something cold spread through his chest. Something that felt like what humans called dread. For the first time in 200 years, Prince Valith Keth was afraid. Valith stood at the window and watched the snow fall. The world outside was white and quiet. Inside, the Larson family was eating breakfast and laughing about something Lily had said. They did not know that in 72 hours, everything they loved would be turned to ash. He should not care. These were primitive beings, insects. Their lives meant nothing compared to the glory of the Kethvari Empire. This is what he had been taught. This is what he had believed for 200 years. But now, watching Marta pour coffee for Eric while Lily showed her mother a new drawing, Valith found that he could not believe it anymore. He needed to understand. If he was going to do something foolish, if he was going to betray his people and his training for these humans, he needed to know why they were worth saving. The Larsons had something called the Internet. It was a primitive information network that connected most humans on the planet. Valith accessed it using a small device Ingrid called a laptop. His knowledge of human technology was limited, but the interface was simple enough for even children to use. He began to search. He read for hours. He read about human history, human science, human art. He read about their wars and their peace, their cruelty and their kindness, their failures and their triumphs. What he found changed everything. Humans sent messages into space. They built machines to carry greetings in many languages, hoping that somewhere in the darkness, someone would hear them. They spent resources and time on a project that would probably never succeed, simply because they wanted to say hello to the universe. Vilest people would never do this. It was inefficient, wasteful, foolish, and yet, somehow, it was the most beautiful thing Velith had ever seen. He read about human soldiers who threw themselves on explosives to save their friends. They died in pain and fear so that others might live. They received no reward for this. They simply did it because they could not imagine doing anything else. In the Kethvari military, soldiers were tools. They followed orders. They did not sacrifice themselves for each other because sacrifice implied attachment, and attachment was weakness. But these humans formed bonds so strong they would die rather than break them. He read about scientists who dedicated their entire lives to curing diseases they would never suffer from. Doctors who traveled to dangerous places to help strangers. Teachers who spent decades shaping young minds for small pay and little recognition. Artists who created beauty that would outlive them by centuries. None of this was efficient. None of it served the individual's survival. By Kethvari logic, it was all completely irrational, but it was also the reason humans had survived. They were not strong like the Kethvari. They could not live for hundreds of years. They had no genetic enhancements, no advanced technology, no empires spanning galaxies. They were soft and fragile and short-lived. They should have gone extinct long ago. Instead, they thrived. They built civilizations from nothing. They recovered from disasters that would have destroyed other species. They kept going even when everything seemed hopeless. And Velith, finally, understood why. They had something his people had removed. Something that seemed like weakness but was actually strength. They loved. They hoped. They felt joy and pain and everything in between. These emotions connected them to each other in ways that pure logic never could. A Kethvari soldier would follow orders because that was efficient. A human soldier would follow their friends into death because they loved them. And love, Velith was beginning to understand, was more powerful than any order. He closed the laptop and sat in silence. His people had made a mistake. They thought they had evolved beyond primitive emotions. In reality, they had crippled themselves. They had removed the very thing that made life worth living. "You look sad," a small voice said. Velith turned. Lily was standing beside him, holding a cup of something warm. She offered it to him. "It's hot chocolate," she said. "Mom says it makes everything better." Velith took the cup. He did not need it. He did not need any human food. But he drank it anyway, and the warmth spread through his body in a way that felt good. "Why do you never smile?" Lily asked. She climbed onto the chair beside him, her small legs swinging above the floor. "My people removed that function," Velith said. "We do not smile. We do not laugh. We do not cry." Lily stared at him for a long moment. Her eyes were very serious. "That's the saddest thing I ever heard," she said. Then she hugged him. Velith's combat training identified the embrace as a restraint technique. His instincts told him to break free, to establish distance, to eliminate the threat. But Lily was not a threat. She was a small human child who thought he looked sad and wanted to make him feel better. He did not push her away. He did not know how long they sat like that. Eventually, Lily fell asleep against his side. He carried her to her bed, moving quietly so he would not wake the others. Then he went outside. The night was cold and clear. Stars filled the sky, more than humans usually saw because they were far from the city lights. Somewhere up there, 7 warships were coming to destroy everything. Marta found him standing in the snow. She was wearing a heavy coat and carrying 2 cups of hot cocoa. She handed one to Valith without a word. They stood together in silence, watching the stars. "I know you're not from around here," Marta said finally. "I don't mean Minnesota. I mean, up there." She pointed at the sky. "I'm old, but I'm not stupid. Ships don't look like yours. Blood doesn't shine like starlight." Valith said nothing. He waited for fear, for accusation, for demands. "I don't care what you are," Marta continued. "I care who you are. And I've watched you this week. You're kind to my granddaughter. You listen to my husband's stories. You look at the Christmas tree like you've never seen anything beautiful before." She turned to face him. "Whatever you're running from, son, you've got people now. That counts for something." Valith felt his chest tighten. That strange pressure again. That almost pain that was not really pain. "There is a fleet coming," he said. "My people. They will be here in less than 3 days." Marta's face paled. "And that's bad?" "They intend to sterilize this planet. Kill everyone. Because I was contaminated by contact with your species." He paused. "I should feel nothing about this. I was designed to feel nothing. But I find that He stopped. He did not know how to finish the sentence. Marta was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was steady. "Then we fight. You cannot fight them. Your technology is thousands of years behind theirs. You have no chance. Maybe not." Marta shrugged. "But we'll fight anyway. That's what humans do. We don't give up just because the odds are bad." She smiled at him, and it was the saddest, bravest smile Valith had ever seen. "You've been watching us all week. Haven't you figured that out yet?" Valith looked at the old woman. She was small and fragile, and would be dead in 20 years even without an alien invasion. She had no power, no weapons, no army. And yet she stood here in the snow, ready to fight an empire that spanned 11 galaxies. His people would call this stupidity. But Valith was beginning to think it was something else entirely. He made his decision. He could not stop the fleet alone. But maybe he did not have to be alone. Maybe, for the first time in his life, he could ask for help. "I will need to speak to your leaders," he said. "All of them. As quickly as possible." Marta nodded. "Ingrid works for the government. Not a high position, but she knows people who know people." She smiled again. "We'll make some calls." Valith looked up at the stars. The fleet was coming. The end was coming. But for the first time since he crashed on this strange planet, he felt something that might have been hope. The next 30 hours moved faster than Valith thought possible. Ingrid made calls. Those people made more calls. Within 6 hours, black vehicles with tinted windows arrived at the Larson farm. Men and women in dark suits asked questions. They took photographs. They ran tests on the wreckage of Valith's ship. They looked at him like he was a bomb that might explode at any moment. But they listened. And when they understood what was coming, they acted. By the next morning, Valith was speaking to the leaders of Earth. It was not a physical meeting. He sat in a room filled with screens, each one showing faces from different parts of the world. The United Nations, they called it. Representatives from every nation on the planet gathered to hear what an alien prince had to say. Valith did not waste time with pleasantries. He had studied human communication enough to know that honesty would serve him better than diplomacy. "In approximately 36 hours, he said, a fleet of 7 Kethvari warships will enter your solar system. Each ship is capable of destroying a continent. Your most advanced weapons would barely scratch their shields. By any logical analysis, you cannot win this fight." The screens filled with murmurs and worried faces. Some leaders looked angry. Others looked afraid. A few simply looked tired, as if they had always known something like this would happen. "The fleet is coming because of me," Valeth continued. "I crashed on your planet. I was exposed to your species. My people believe I have been contaminated. Their solution is to eliminate the contamination. All of it. Every human. Every animal. Every living thing on Earth." A woman from one of the African nations spoke. Her name tag said Nigeria. Her voice was calm and clear. "You say we cannot win, but you are here, speaking to us. You could have hidden. You could have let us die without warning. Instead, you came to us. Why?" Valeth paused. He had been asking himself this question for days. Now, finally, he thought he understood the answer. "Because I have seen what you are," he said. "In my short time among you, I have witnessed things that should not be possible. You are chaos and contradiction. You love things that hurt you. You fight for causes that may never succeed. You waste resources on art and music and stories that serve no practical purpose. You are inefficient in ways that should have destroyed you millennia ago." He paused. The screens were silent. Every eye was on him. "And yet you are still here. You have survived ice ages and plagues and wars against yourselves. You have taken a hostile planet and made it your home. You have reached for the stars, even though you cannot yet touch them. I do not understand how you have done these things. Your existence defies every model my people have created." He looked at the faces on the screens. Leaders of nations. Men and women who held the fate of billions in their hands. They looked small and fragile and completely unprepared for what was coming. "I believe you will find a way to survive," Valeth said. "I have no logical basis for this belief. No data, no analysis, no calculation supports it. Your species has a word for this kind of irrational certainty. You call it faith." He paused. "I find that I have contracted it." For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then a man from China began to applaud. A woman from Brazil joined him. Within seconds, the sound of clapping filled the room from screens all over the world. And then humanity did something extraordinary. They stopped fighting each other. Within hours, nations that had been enemies for centuries shared their most secret military technologies. Scientists who had spent careers competing against each other began working together. Governments that could not agree on anything agreed on this. They would not go quietly. Valeth watched with growing amazement as the planet mobilized. Nuclear submarines changed course toward coordinates he had calculated. Fighter jets were retrofitted with modifications based on his knowledge of Kethvari shield frequencies. Hackers from a dozen countries collaborated to create viruses that could target the fleet's communication systems. It was messy. It was chaotic. It was the most inefficient military preparation Valeth had ever seen. People argued about everything. They made mistakes. They wasted time on things that did not matter, but they kept going. They did not stop. They did not give up. A young pilot from Australia approached Valeth during the final preparations. She was small and thin, with short hair and a smile that did not match the fear in her eyes. "I'm part of the first wave," she said. "We're going to fly into the fleet and try to take out their shield generators. Command says our survival probability is about 3%. Valeth nodded. He knew the numbers. He had helped calculate them. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. The pilot shrugged. "I guess I wanted you to know. You warned us. You gave us a chance. Most of us aren't going to make it, but because of you, some of us might." She held out her hand. Valeth had learned this gesture. It was called a handshake. A sign of respect. He took her hand. "We know the odds," the pilot said. "We're going anyway. That's what humans do." She walked away. Valeth watched her go, wondering if this was the last time he would see her. wondering how many others would walk toward death today simply because they refused to let their world die without a fight. Then the fleet arrived. 7 massive warships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system. They were beautiful in a terrible way. Dark metal shaped like blades, covered in lights that pulsed with energy. Each one was the size of a small city. The fleet commander, Admiral Dexvorak, broadcast a message across all frequencies. His voice was cold and flat, like all Kethvari voices. Without emotion, without mercy, inhabitants of the contaminated world, surrender the air Valith Keth. Submit to sterilization procedures. Resistance is illogical and will result in unnecessary suffering. This is not a negotiation. The message played on every screen on Earth. People stopped what they were doing and listened. They looked at each other. They looked at the sky dot, and then they answered dot. It started in New York. Someone hacked into the broadcast system and played a single word from the speakers in Times Square. Then the word spread. Television stations picked it up. Radio stations broadcast it. People shouted it from rooftops and whispered it in shelters. The word was translated into 1,000 languages. It was spoken by presidents and children. It was sung in churches and screamed in stadiums. It was typed into computer systems and broadcast into space so that the fleet could hear it clearly. One word. One answer. Spoken by billions of voices at once. No. Valith stood in the command center, surrounded by screens showing the response. He watched humanity refuse to die. He watched them choose to fight even though fighting was hopeless. He watched them stand together in a way his people had never managed despite all their genetic engineering and logical superiority. And something happened to his face. His cheeks moved. His mouth curved upward. It hurt, because his muscles were not designed for this expression. But he could not stop it. For the first time in 200 years, Prince Valith Keth smiled. The battle for Earth began at sunrise. The first wave of human fighters launched from carriers across the Pacific Ocean. They were small and fragile against the massive Kethvari warships. The fleet's weapons could destroy them with a single shot. By every measure of military science, they should have been swept away like dust. They attacked anyway. The Australian pilot whose name Valith never learned flew her jet straight into the lead ship's shield generator. Her weapons did almost nothing, but she did not turn back. She kept firing until her ammunition was gone. Then she rammed her jet into the generator housing. The explosion created a momentary gap in the shield. Other pilots saw the gap. They poured through it like water through a crack. They died by the dozens, but they kept coming. And slowly, impossibly, they began to hurt the ship. Admiral Dexvorak could not understand what he was seeing. The humans had no chance. His computers confirmed this with absolute certainty. They were throwing their lives away for nothing, and yet they kept coming. Submarines launched nuclear missiles from beneath the ocean. The weapons were primitive, but they struck the ships in places Valith had identified as vulnerable. Ground stations fired lasers that barely scratched the hull, but every scratch added up. Hackers sent viruses into the fleet's communication systems, causing chaos and confusion. The battle raged for hours. The humans took terrible losses. Cities were damaged. Thousands died. But they did not stop. And then Valith did something that no heir had done in 40,000 years. He spoke to his people, using emergency broadcast codes that only the royal family knew. He transmitted his voice to every ship in the fleet. Every soldier, every officer, every person who served the Kethvari Empire heard what he had to say. "I am Valith Keth," he said, "third heir to the throne. I speak now not as a commander, but as someone who has experienced what we removed from ourselves. I speak as someone who has felt." The battle paused. Ships held their fire. Everyone was listening. "We call emotions a weakness," Valeth continued. "We believe we evolve beyond them. We think our logic makes us superior. But look at what is happening here. Look at these primitive beings who should have surrendered hours ago. They are still fighting, not because they can win, but because they refuse to lose." He took a breath. His voice was shaking. Kethvari voices never shook, but his did now. "They have something we removed from ourselves. They call it love. They call it hope. They call it happiness. We have no words for these things because we feared them. And we were right to fear them. Because a species that fights for something beyond survival cannot be calculated, cannot be predicted, cannot be broken." He looked at the screens showing the battle. Human ships were still attacking, even though they were dying. They were not retreating. They would never retreat. "Look at them," Valeth said. "Look at what they are willing to sacrifice. Look at what they believe in. And ask yourselves, when was the last time we believed in anything?" The transmission ended. For a long moment, nothing happened. The fleet continued its attack. The humans continued their defense. It seemed like Vili's words had changed nothing. Then 3 ships broke formation. Their commanders did not explain their decision. They did not ask permission. They simply turned their vessels away from Earth and began moving toward the edge of the solar system. Admiral Lex Vorak demanded they return. They did not respond. The remaining 4 ships continued the attack, but their coordination was broken. The virus had damaged their communications. The human strikes had weakened their shields. And something else was happening. Something that could not be measured by computers or analyzed by logic. Doubt had entered the Kethvari fleet. Soldiers who had never questioned anything began to question everything. Officers who had followed orders without thought began to think. The words of their prince echoed in their minds, planting seeds of something that should have been impossible. Then a transmission arrived from the Kethvari homeworld. Admiral Lex Vorak read it 3 times before he believed it. Abort mission. Quarantine solar system. Return for analysis. The fleet withdrew. It happened quickly, almost too quickly to believe. The massive warships turned and accelerated away from Earth. Within an hour, they had entered hyperspace. Within 2 hours, they were gone. Earth had survived. The cost was terrible. Cities lay in ruins. Thousands of people had died. The world would spend years recovering from this single day. But they had won. Against an enemy with technology thousands of years ahead of theirs. Against a fleet that could destroy continents. They had won. Not by strength. Not by numbers. Not by logic. They had won because they refused to give up. Because they loved their world enough to die for it. Because they believed, against all reason and evidence, that they could find a way. Because they were human. 1 year later, Valeth stood in the Larson farmhouse on December 25th. He had been officially exiled from the Empire. The Kethvari Council declared him irrecoverably contaminated and sentenced him to permanent separation from his people. He could never go home. He could never see his family again. He was alone in the universe, except he was not alone at all. The farmhouse was full of people. Eric and Marta, older but still strong. Ingrid, who had become something of a celebrity after helping to save the world. Neighbors who had come to meet the alien who had warned them. Friends who had become family over the past year. And Lily. She ran to Valeth the moment he entered the room. She was 6 now, taller than before, but still small. She hugged him tightly, and this time he hugged her back. "I made you a present," she said, pushing a wrapped package into his hands. Valeth opened it carefully. Inside was a drawing on thick paper, done with colors that did not smear or fade. It showed a silver figure surrounded by people. The figure had purple eyes and white skin. and on its face was a yellow curve. "I gave you a smile," Lily explained, "since you said you didn't have one. But you do now. I've seen it." Valeth looked at the drawing. Then he looked at the people around him. Eric was pretending he was not crying. Marta was taking photographs. Ingrid was laughing at something a neighbor had said. And Valeth understood. He understood what happiness was. It was not efficient. It served no strategic purpose. It could not be measured or optimized or controlled. His people had been right to fear it, because it was powerful in ways that defied all logic. Happiness was choosing to love when love was not logical. It was fighting when victory was impossible. It was finding light in darkness, not because the darkness demanded it, but because the light was worth protecting. Happiness was what made humans dangerous. It was what made them beautiful. It was what made them refuse to surrender even when the universe said they should. And it was what Valeth felt now. Standing in a farmhouse in Minnesota, surrounded by people who had become his family. His face did that thing again. That painful, wonderful thing where his muscles moved in ways they were never designed to move. The curve of his lips. The crinkle around his eyes. The expression that humans made when they felt joy. He smiled. Not because he was supposed to. Not because he was ordered to. But because, for the first time in his existence, he was truly, completely, irrationally happy. Marta raised her camera. Everyone together now. The Larsons gathered around Valeth. Lily sat on his shoulders. Eric put a hand on his arm. Ingrid stood beside her mother. And for one perfect moment, they were all exactly where they belonged. The camera flashed. The picture would hang on the wall of the farmhouse for generations. It would become famous across Earth as a symbol of hope and unity. Children would learn about it in school. Scientists would study it as evidence that even the most alien creatures could learn to feel. But to Valeth, it was something simpler. It was proof that he had found what his people had thrown away 40,000 years ago. It was proof that he had found a home. And somewhere deep in his chest, in the place where his heart should not have been able to feel anything at all, something warm and bright continued to grow. Something that had no logical purpose. Something that his people had no word for. Something that humans called happiness.